She didn't speak in words, not because she didn't want to, but because the world never learned how to listen. Born deaf, often overlooked, she lived in silence not of her own choosing, but of a society too rushed to slow down. He, on the other hand, had too many words, just not the right ones. A recent immigrant, new to the language, new to the rules, new to the feeling of being misunderstood at every turn. Two kids, two different silences, one shaped by soundlessness, the other by struggle. They sat in the same classroom, close enough to see each other, but separated by barriers neither knew how to cross. Until one day, he tapped a beat and she answered. No words, no translation, just rhythm. And in that moment, everything changed. Because what began as a mistake on a class list became a language only they could speak, a friendship no one else could fully explain, and a connection that didn't just break the silence, it redefined it. How do you build something real when you can't speak the same language? Sometimes you don't need the same words, you just need the same rhythm. Amina was born into a world of silence, but it was never empty. To her, the silence held shape. It shimmered in the way sunlight danced through leaves. It moved with the rhythm of her mother's footsteps in the kitchen. It pulsed through the vibrations of her fingers against a wooden floor. She was profoundly deaf and profoundly aware. She watched the world closely, every flicker of a brow, every shift in body language. But watching isn't the same as being seen. Her parents did what they could. They learned some sign language, they advocated, smiled at teachers, explained her needs. But the outside world, it didn't always bend for a child like Amina. By the time she was 12, she was fluent in American Sign Language. But most of her classmates weren't. Her teachers tried to include her, but often fell short, so she retreated. Not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. Instead of trying to lip read conversations that moved too fast, she danced. Not in recitals, not for applause, just for herself. She danced in the hallway when no one was around, in her room with the door closed, at recess, in the corner of the blacktop, feeling rhythm through her sneakers, because when the world wouldn't speak her language, she spoke through motion. Across the room in that same classroom sat Rafael, new to the country, new to everything. He had arrived just 6 months earlier from Honduras, clutching a backpack, a worn photo of his grandfather, and only a handful of English phrases. In his hometown, he had been talkative, silly, sociable. But here, every word felt like a hurdle. He was mocked for his accent, corrected mid-sentence, called slow behind his back. So he stopped speaking unless he had to. Amina and Rafael were placed in the same classroom that year, sat just one row apart, two kids with rich inner worlds, each fluent in a language no one else bothered to learn, each drifting in their own version of isolation. They nodded when spoken to, smiled politely when uncertain, and went unnoticed by most of their peers. But beneath that quiet surface, something waited, a beat neither of them could name yet, but both had been carrying for years, and all it would take to awaken it was one unexpected school project and a rhythm they didn't know they already shared. It started with something small, a school project, the annual spring showcase. Every year, each class had to create a short performance, something creative, a skit, a dance, a presentation. This time, the teacher decided to do something inclusive. Pair students who didn't usually work together, mix personalities, bridge backgrounds. It sounded good in theory, but when Amina looked at the sheet and saw her name beside Raphael's, her heart sank. They had never spoken, not once, not even a smile exchanged in the hallway. He didn't know ASL. She didn't speak, and neither of them had the energy to pretend. The first day of rehearsal, they sat across from each other in silence, not the awkward silence of strangers, the silence of two people who had learned not to expect much from anyone. Rafael pulled out his phone, typed something into Google Translate, turned it toward her. "What should we do for the performance?" Amina looked at the screen, then looked at him. Her expression polite, unreadable. She didn't type anything back. She just gave a small shrug. Day 2, same thing. Day 3, still nothing. Until something shifted. It was after school. The classroom was nearly empty. Rafael sat waiting for the bus, tapping on the desk with a pencil. A slow, steady beat. He didn't realize Amina was still there, gathering her backpack quietly from behind him. Tap, 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 tap. She paused, watched, then, without warning, she responded. She tapped back, same rhythm, matched it perfectly with her palm against the table. He froze, turned. Their eyes met. A question passed between them. Not, "What are you doing?" but, "Do you hear this too?" Raphael smiled. Amina, barely, but her posture changed. A softness crept in. Curiosity. The next day, Raphael brought a small hand drum from home. He sat in the corner and began to play a beat. Not fancy, not fast, just honest. Amina watched, then moved. Her feet followed the tempo. Her body told a story. They didn't speak, but they were having their first conversation. Each beat he played was a question. Each movement she made was an answer. They laughed for the first time, not out loud, but in the way shared rhythm feels like recognition. By the end of the week, the classroom assistant found them practicing in the hallway. Not out of obligation, but something closer to joy. They weren't preparing a performance. They were building a bridge between silence and struggle, between two rhythms that somehow fit. What they created in the weeks that followed would not only redefine their project, it would redefine what connection meant to everyone who witnessed it. What started as curiosity became choreography, but not the kind you learn in a studio. This was something else, something built moment by moment between two people who were never supposed to connect. Every lunch break, Rafael and Amina met in the old music room. No mirrors, no fancy floors, just cracked linoleum and a dented hand drum. Rafael would sit cross-legged with the drum between his knees, eyes focused, hands listening. Amina would stretch in silence, feel the rhythm before it came. She never asked for instructions. She didn't need them. He would tap. She would move. He'd shift tempo. She'd pivot mid-motion. It wasn't rehearsed. It was responsive, alive. They weren't just creating a performance. They were speaking in a language of weight, breath, space, stillness. Sometimes she would drum, stomping her heel on the tile, flicking her fingers on the wall, and Raphael would echo her back, building music from mimicry, echoing her stories in sound. No spoken words, no written notes, and yet nothing was missing. 2 weeks before the showcase, their teacher asked, "What's your act called?" Amina signed something. Raphael didn't understand, so she wrote it down. Echoes. Because that's what they had become to each other. An echo of expression, a mirror of movement, a shared vibration in an unspoken world. When the night of the showcase arrived, Other students had props, costumes, dialogue. Parents held up phones. Teachers beamed with pride. Then it was their turn. No intro, no explanation. Just a chair, a drum, a barefoot girl in jeans. The lights dimmed, the room hushed, and Rafael began. A single beat, soft, steady, like a heartbeat waking up. Amina entered slowly, every step deliberate, not dramatic, not polished, present. She paused. He stopped. The room held its breath. Then she moved, sudden, sharp, like a word finally spoken. He answered with rhythm. She answered with motion. Together, they told a story the audience couldn't fully explain. But everyone felt it. It was about being unseen, about being unheard, about finding someone who doesn't just notice you, but responds to you. Their body spoke of exile and reunion, of rhythms that don't match until they do. And when the final beat fell silent, Amina stood still, eyes on Rafael. He nodded, she nodded back. It was over. For a moment, there was no applause, just stillness, the kind that follows truth. Then the room erupted, not in polite claps, but in something closer to awe, to gratitude, because in just a few minutes, two children who shared no common language had shown the entire room what understanding looks like. But for Amina and Rafael, the real story wasn't on that stage. It was in what came after. Because connection like that doesn't fade. It multiplies. After the showcase, things could have gone back to normal. Back to silent lunches. Back to parallel lives. But something had changed. They had cracked something open. Not just in front of an audience, but in each other. The next day, Rafael waited for Amina by the lockers. She noticed right away. He was holding his phone, but this time, he didn't type anything. He just tapped his fingers against the side of his jeans. A soft, familiar rhythm. Amina smiled, tapped back with her foot. And just like that, the conversation continued. They didn't become best friends. They didn't start texting every night or hanging out after school. That wasn't their way, but every day, without fail, they found each other. At lunch, at recess, in the hallways, on benches, no fanfare, no explanations, just presence. Sometimes they would sit side by side saying nothing at all. Sometimes they would sketch rhythms on paper napkins. Sometimes Amina would sign, and Rafael would try to mirror her hands. Clumsy at first, but never laughed at. Rafael began learning American Sign Language. One word at a time, he'd stay after school with the librarian, practicing fingerspelling, watching videos, trying, really trying. Because for the first time, he wanted to understand someone, not just be understood. And Amina? She began writing notes, not because she had to, but because it made it easier for Rafael to keep up. She even helped him with English, gesturing, pointing, finding rhythm in reading. They taught each other in ways no curriculum ever could. He taught her patience for sound. She taught him the language of trust. Together, they started teaching younger students how to tell stories through rhythm. They didn't call it a class or a club. It was just something they did. A shared gift, offered freely. One child, newly arrived from Vietnam, came to their sessions and just watched, then tapped his own beat one day. And Amina smiled. That's when Rafael realized they weren't just performing anymore. They were creating space for others, for those who didn't fit the mold, for those who carried silence and didn't know what to do with it. Their bond wasn't loud, wasn't flashy. It was steady, like a drum beat under dialogue, like the bass of a song you feel more than hear. And soon that steady rhythm would ripple outward, changing more lives than they ever imagined. They never meant to go viral. They never sought out applause or headlines or interviews. They were just two kids, speaking in rhythm because words weren't enough, but something that pure has a way of echoing beyond its walls. A video of their spring showcase performance made its way online, uploaded by a parent, shared by a teacher, viewed by a stranger. Then, suddenly, it was everywhere, not because it was flashy, but because it was true. People couldn't explain it in words, they just felt it. Two children, one who couldn't speak the language, one who didn't hear it, still found a way to understand each other. And in doing so, they reminded the world what connection really looks like. Organizations began to reach out. A local arts nonprofit invited them to perform at an accessibility showcase, then a cultural festival, then an education conference. They weren't just performers anymore. They were ambassadors of something deeper, a new kind of communication, a reminder that language is not the only way to be heard. At a disability inclusion panel, Amina stood on stage. She didn't speak, but she signed a short message while Rafael interpreted beside her. She signed, "Understanding begins when you stop needing everything to be said out loud." The room was quiet, moved, not just by what was said, but by the way it was shared. After that day, more schools began introducing rhythm-based communication programs. More teachers reached out, asking how to bridge their own language gaps. More students, quiet ones, different ones, started tapping their own desks, looking for someone who might answer back. Their friendship became something bigger than either of them had planned, but it never stopped being simple. Even after the video views climbed into the millions, even when local news stations called, even when adults praised them as inspirational, they still met on the same bench, still drummed together in the empty music room after school, still said the most important things without saying them, because in a noisy world, their quiet understanding became a lifeline for anyone who had ever felt unheard, unseen, untranslated. But perhaps the most powerful echoes would come not from cameras or crowds, but from the ones who knew them best, the ones who saw the change from the inside. If you ask those closest to Amina and Rafael, the people who watched their connection unfold, you won't get a list of accomplishments. You'll get moments, quiet ones, that linger, because what these two created wasn't loud, but it was unforgettable. Ms. Claire, their teacher. Ms. Claire had taught for over 15 years. She'd seen hundreds of students, but none like these two. Ms. Claire shares, "When I first paired them, I honestly thought it was a mistake. I didn't know how they'd even communicate. But what I saw, it wasn't just communication, it was collaboration at the soul level. They taught the whole class, including me, that connection doesn't begin with words, it begins with attention." Jalen, a classmate. Jalen sat 2 desks behind them all year. At first, he barely noticed either of them. Then, he couldn't stop watching. Jalen recalls, "I used to think they were just quiet background characters, you know? But when they performed, I felt like I saw them for the first time. I remember thinking, if they can understand each other like that, what's my excuse for not trying harder with people? It made me want to listen better, to look better." Rafael's mother translated from Spanish. She came to the showcase with her husband, unsure what to expect. When it ended, she was crying before she even stood up. Rafael's mother reflects, "My son used to come home silent, not sad, just quiet. Then he met Amina. And now, he taps rhythms on the table during dinner. He tells stories with his hands. He's not just learning a language, he's becoming someone who hears with his heart. Amina's father. Amina had always been expressive, but for most of her life, her expression felt like a monologue, until Rafael, Amina's father, shares, "My daughter has always had rhythm, always had music in her bones. But something changed when Rafael came along. She started moving with intention again, not just dancing for herself, but dancing with someone. I think she finally felt heard, and as a father, that's all I ever wanted for her." They didn't change the world overnight, but they changed someone's world. Again and again, through rhythm, through trust, through a language that didn't exist until they created it together. And that language, though quiet, still echoes. They never became fluent in each other's native language. Rafael still struggles with complex English sentences. Amina never found sound, but they both found something far more rare: fluency in each other. Years later, if you saw them sitting together at the back of the library, you might still mistake them for quiet kids, unremarkable, reserved. But watch a little closer, and you'd see it. The tap of a finger on a tabletop, the tilt of a head, the beat of a shared memory passing silently between them. No stage, no spotlight, just rhythm. Raphael once said that Amina made the world feel slower, like it was finally breathing at a pace he could keep up with. And Amina told her father that Raphael didn't just listen to her movements, he moved with them. That was the difference. He didn't try to fix her silence. She didn't try to correct his stumbles. They simply walked beside each other, step for step, beat for beat. They didn't fall in love, not in the way movies often demand. They fell into alignment, into a quiet kind of loyalty, one that never needed a label, because not all great loves are romantic. Some are rhythmic, some are steady, some are built in the sacred space between languages, and those are the ones that last. Amina still dances, Raphael still drums, and when they're together, they still don't say much. They don't need to. Because when someone knows your rhythm, truly knows it, no explanation is required. And somewhere out there, another pair of souls is waiting to be heard in their own unspoken language. In a world that's always speaking, talking over itself to be heard, we often forget the power of what isn't said. We forget that language comes in many forms: a glance, a gesture, a rhythm shared between strangers. And sometimes that's where the real listening begins. Amina and Raphael didn't speak the same words, but they spoke the same truth: that everyone, regardless of ability, background, or fluency, deserves to be seen, deserves to be felt. And when we take the time to tune in to rhythms we don't understand yet, we unlock the kind of connection that can change everything. So if you've ever felt unheard, if you've ever struggled to find words, or wish someone would just see you for who you are, know this: you are not alone. And your rhythm, it's still being heard, even in the silence. Leave a comment below for someone who once understood you without needing an explanation. Tag a friend who speaks your language even without words. And if this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to Able in Every Way. Because here we tell the stories that don't always get told. The quiet ones, the unseen ones, the ones that move us without making a sound.